Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 12:30 to 1:30 session of the 2022 Open Simulator Community Conference. In this session, we are pleased to introduce the presentation, the Open Metaverse Interoperability Panel. Our panel is Mal Burns, Ivo Henning, Josephine Dorado, and Jesse Alton. Mal Burns is the host of In-World Review, a weekly news and discussion program mostly focused on the hypergrid, which has been running for over 15 years. Ivo Henning has 20 years of experience or more as an interactive showrunner, production strategist, and a creative force of nature, connecting brilliant visionaries and teams with resources, ideas, and opportunities. Josephine Dorado is an award-winning developer, designer, and educator with a focus on immersive learning and social impact. With a portfolio that has garnered multiple Fulbright Awards and a MacArthur Foundation Award in digital media and learning, her work concentrates on innovation in VR and extended reality experiences. Jesse Alton, Mr. Metaverse, is he founded a community of open metaverse evangelists called Angel XR and co-founded the Open Metaverse Interoperability Group at https://omnigroup.org. It's omigroup.org. Please check out the website found at the conference.opencenter.org for speaker bios, details about the sessions, and the full schedule of events. Now, this session is being live streamed and recorded. So if you have questions or comments during the session, you may send tweets to @OpenSimCC with the hashtag #OSCC22. Welcome, everyone. Let's begin the session. Over to you, Mal.
Well, thanks very much, Leah. It's good to be back here again. We're here every year, aren't we, more or less? If you're a regular here, you'll notice that my Saturday panel, I'm normally joined by Adam Frisby, and that actually had been the plan this year. Unfortunately, I've got to inform you that he contracted COVID, and he thought he was on the way to recovery and would be able to actually speak today, but unfortunately he can't. So, contrary to what it says in the earlier version of the program, he's not here, but I'm sure you'll join me in wishing him the absolute best of get well soon and all that sort of stuff. We're also hoping to be joined. He's not here yet, actually. Otherwise known as Mr. Metaverse. I know this morning in Eastern time he was on a 10-mile marathon run, so I hope he hasn't done something to himself. But he was pretty sure he'd be here, so maybe he's just been a bit delayed. We will hope for the best. So it comes to me to really start chatting anyway with Inkenzo, who I know as Evo. Evo, and well, actually, I know you most as Inkenzo from way back when. But
way back in the day in Second Life, circa 2006, I think we met, Mom.
Yeah, way back when. Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I've always remembered your name as well. It's one of the memorable Avatar names, as it were. And we're also joined by Josephine Funk Soup. Don't let me slip up and say Tech Soup again, please.
Hello.
There is a commonality there, but welcome, Josephine, too.
Thank you.
And both of you guys, or girls, I should say, I don't know, are members of OMI, and as indeed am I. I just pop in once a week to keep an eye on what's going on and publicise what I can where I can, really. But in your separate ways, you're both part of OMI. Now, I'm going to leave it to you, I guess, as it were, to describe OMI a little bit. I always think of it as Open Metaverse Initiative, but it isn't. It's
interoperability. Yes.
Interop. So there we go. It could be the same thing, couldn't it? Really?
It is an initiative of sorts, but it is very much a focused initiative.
Yeah, and of late we have made contact with firstly the Metaverse Standards people who started up about 6 months ago, and more recently we've got these other people who in February are going to have an Open Sim conference, except that the sponsors are Lamina, or is it Lamina that pronounced it?
Lamina One is one of many funds in the space. And so let me take a
Yeah,
step back and we can talk a
yeah,
little bit about the history of how we got here over the last
yeah.
few years, if you'd
Yeah,
like.
let's do that, Eva. I'll start with you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, um, as some of you know, I've been in Virtual Worlds production with Avatar Joy and Funk Soup and Mal and many others here for over 15 years. I jumped in about 2004 into Second Life and stayed in as a professional developer for about 5-6 years. And even throughout many other WebXR and VR productions, I stayed very closely tied to the open source community related to all things VR and AR, but also what became WebXR and the beginnings of the open metaverse on the web. And so I stayed lightly engaged in the research, although many of you have been more full-time engaged in that research for the last 20 years. I have worked with many of you on various products and tooling initiatives over the time. Mr. Metaverse, however, reached out to me pretty early on in the pandemic and let me know that he wanted to form this group that would be a W3C working group, community group to start, but that would work toward tooling, protocols, everything that leads into the standardization process, all the way up, but not necessarily focusing on standards, really focusing more on open research and development in a community of like-minded people who believe that we need an open metaverse in order to thrive together. So we've been able to form a community group that is now a functional and amazing initiative on interoperability. And that includes many different groups and many different initiatives. One of the things that grew out of that was a project called Meta Traversal, which was a series of 6 events co-hosted by Neil Trevitt, Ben Irwin, and Terry Schlesser. And in that process, Neil Trevitt, who also leads Kronos Group, was very clear that we needed more of a constellation of standards. And that's what led into forming the Metaverse Standards Forum, which is now thousands of professionals working across these industries. And that includes digital twins, that includes mixed reality and live streaming, AR, VR, XR, and all of the places where that meets the open web. So while Mr. Metaverse and Funk Soup and Avatar Joy and many here are a part of a great community of people doing this research, so are you, and we invite you to be a part of that initiative. So Mal, I hope that takes a step back, but we've been around for a year and a half, almost 2 years as a community
yeah.
group. We now sit with other bodies that are standards making bodies, but we do this sort of early stage research before you get to standardization.
Yeah, the main meeting point, as it were, for OMI is their Discord channel. And I've lost count of how many people are in it. I mean, when I just pop in for the weekly roundup,
It's
I
over
think,
500 engineers from around
yeah,
the world, of
it's a
which
lot.
I would say 100 are active in different groups working on
Yeah,
GLTF or avatar interoperability or other initiatives of a wide nature, including
yeah.
touching the real world metaverse and research here too.
And of course, although he couldn't make it, Adam is one of those who's working on the GLTF thing, isn't he? The scripting sort of stuff. He's part of
Yes,
that.
so extensions and making sure that our extensions and our creative work, our 3D objects and our scenes work across the open metaverse, work
Yeah.
anywhere and can be shared easily. So that's the deep work of interoperability, is making sure that creators can thrive
Yeah.
and making sure that we can take our work with us and do so in safe and secure, but also collaborative ways.
Right. I will come back to this in a minute, particularly with a view to. I know there's a lot of devs here because it's the, the core devs of OpenSim, so to speak, who may well be keen to know about ways in which aspects of the OpenSim environment might possibly interoperate or connect somehow with other open source plugins, as it were, that you might be working on. But first of all, I'll go to Josephine. Maybe you just like to give a roundup about yourself in a sort of same manner that Inkenzo has done, really. There. Oh, sorry, Evo. Just introduce
Sure.
yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mel. And thanks, Ivo and Kenzo, aka Kenzo. Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, going way back to when Avatar Joy and you and I were all working together in the early 2000s on Second Life, these sort of virtual world experiences. Um, it also goes way back there for me as well. And one of the first programs that I co-founded in Second Life in the early 2000s was Kids Connect, which was it was a international exchange program that connected students in different countries through creative collaboration and theatrical performance. So that was back in, I think it was like in 2005 or something like that. Um, so yeah, going back to that, and then fast forwarding, things just sort of developed and evolved, and some more recent experiences were that I was involved with the WHO, and they have a really cool augmented reality mass casualty simulation experience that they're working on. So I was working on that with them. I think it's a fantastic way to implement XR is in mass casualty scenarios, and then also am now working on an immersive XR immersive learning experience with different sorts of naval defense and trying to scale out also to education and public health. But I think what sort of resonated for me with what Kenzo was saying about the Open Metaverse Interoperability Group is that the whole sort of idea of like the open metaverse being inclusive and being accessible and being for everyone. So it goes back to sort of like Tony Parisi's whole idea of the metaverse is for everyone. And not just in concept, right? In applicability too. You know, when we were working on Kids Connect, Joyce and I, in fact, and friends also together, you know, we often were working with kids and folks that were in sort of like internet challenged areas and sort of always were trying to work towards an experience that was immersive and still inclusive. So that means, you know, looking across what is available and not just, you know, high-end headsets and things like that. You know, so I'm quite bullish these days about WebXR and that, you know, the XR experience should be uh, across device agnostic, right? So sure, it can work in headsets, but also it should work on the web and also it should work on mobile, you know? And I was really attracted to OMI because of the fact that the folks involved in that were also very concerned in a very thoughtful way about making the metaverse accessible across devices and across platforms. And I think it's really important too, because I guess you could also say an analogy is, you know, in the early web days when HTML standards were still being written, there were folks in groups like this that were making sure that HTML was a standard that was interoperable. And otherwise, we'd have these walled gardens where, you know, perhaps the Facebook and the AOL platforms and versions of HTML would be different. So if you can imagine like different walled you know, virtual worlds across the metaverse, that's something that we don't want. We want an open metaverse. So I think that this is the time now to really
Exactly.
focus on that.
Yeah, exactly. A very
Yeah.
crucial time, really, when we see what's suddenly going on as a result of
Yeah,
Facebook
exactly.
proclamations about their vision for the metaverse. It's the in word. I don't think anybody understands what they're talking about out there, really, but it's the in thing, and it is the time to make sure that the terminology, let alone the practicality, isn't actually hijacked by big players who are operating wall gardens, quite frankly. Worse than wall gardens in some respects. Okay, now bringing that a little bit back into focus, um, you mentioned WebXR. That was another question I was actually going to bring up. Um, there's a chap in the audience here I know who's, I think I'm going to be set to interview him in somewhere else, not before long, who has actually been running video tutorials about Frame and stuff. And I know, for example, OMI have investigated Frame. Then you've got Mozilla's hubs, although that's changing, of course. But it seems to me that a lot of the more practical instances of new so-called metaverse platforms I'm seeing are actually WebXR. They're based. Even there's even a sort of the Cyber Lounge who I interviewed here a couple of years ago, where it's based on the web, but it actually looks like OpenSim because they literally built it here, I think, and then moved it across.
Yes.
Don't quote me on that. But do you think the movement here is going to be towards something that is a federation, a bit like Fediverse is for that matter, um,
Yes.
based coming out of the web and connecting that way, or do you think we're talking about? Do you think the future will actually hold something that's a much deeper cross-platform sort of protocol, if you like? Just your thoughts on that, really. I'll go for you first, Eva. I think.
Well, these developments are uneven, but we are absolutely moving right now toward more of a Fediverse approach. If you look at how we use Discord today across worlds and
Yeah,
across the open web, most metaverse platforms I'm talking to right now are looking at some form of web interoperability. Now, not all of them have full web interoperability or use WebXR, but many of them are thinking about or are thinking ahead to a place for that. Now, many of them won't be able to support the kind of portals that we've seen grow across some of these WebXR platforms over the last year. And that's the sort of research we've been doing in a more deep way. I do think we're going to get there in terms of the 3D web and being able to really move effectively into certain types of spaces.
yeah,
Now, that doesn't include private spaces. That is the public, right? And what
yeah,
is public and what is private are being redefined, completely redefined right now. So, as we figure out what are the contours of the 3D web, it is going to include some form of public commons that we can move between. And yes, absolutely, that's going to start as a sort of Fediverse or a multiverse approach. But does that where we end up? No, that's the beginning.
yeah. How about I'll ask you, Josephine, in fact, things like
Sure.
assets and stuff like that. Here in OpenSim, Ferd, who was on the panel here before lunch, operates a system called Outworlds, and it's a sub thing of OpenSim. But the magic of it is, as I found out a few years ago, is that I can literally put an installation of OpenSim on my own computer, offline as it were, and then connect it, with the greater hypergrid. But it means that when I go traveling around collecting things or whatever, all the assets remain in the inventory of my world, which is on my own computer. Philip Rosedale's High Fidelity, and I think it's Vicadia now, operates a similar thing where where you log in, your home space is actually a space that's on your own computer, and then you move out from it into the greater connected world. Do you think that again might be the sort of extended hypergrid, but with private servers? Do you think that might be a kind of model for a future interop? Josephine, or
Hi. Yeah,
whoever,
no, I didn't know if you wanted
wants
me
to
to
take
address
it?
that.
Whoever wants to
Yeah,
take
I
it.
think that's sure, sure. I think that's such an interesting question because really it's also a question of home, and sort of the fluidity of home, especially amidst a multiverse. So I think that's a really, really good question. I think the answer is pretty fluid right now. I think what you're describing is sort of the more standard approach of like, okay, we have home on our quote unquote home on our local computer, and then it opens up to other portals and other multiverse
Yeah,
experiences and things like that. Although I would love to see, approach that also sort of like you could sort of like pack up home into your sort of inventory briefcase and take it with you and open it up in any a platform. And I know that OMI has also been experimenting with these sorts of experiences of sort of like bringing home with you and opening home up wherever you are, which is also a lovely thing. I would also say too that uh, the experience of sort of like an on-premise home, rather sort of like a localized home, is not such a bad idea overall, though, because, for example, when you're working in sort of rural communities, and like I know with the WHO, we were also very concerned about like how are we going to do this mass casualty scenario? We can't do it like in a connected way. It has to be run on premise, completely localized, and then sort of synced up later. You do want to have that completely sort of mesh network, all local approach that is then connected at a later time and synced up. So I think the idea of home being local, yes, but then also the idea of packing up your home and taking it with you, also yes.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's like for assets, we on the hypergrid, we have something called a suitcase, which is basically where you put the objects you want to take with you as you cross into other grids. But yeah, no, you're right. I mean, I love the idea of a home room on my desktop, and I teleport out of it onto the hypergrid and to go wherever I want to go. But that's because I sit around with a 2D screen in front of me all the while, which is my preferred way of interfacing. But of course, if I was out and about, I can't really carry my home on my iPhone. We're not at a stage where the world can be on your iPhone yet. Well, it can, but a very small window. So I mean, I can see difficulties in the idea of sticking with the idea of one's region that's your home and that you teleport out of. But it's sort of it's an idea there. It might prove a bit more kind of difficult on the web. Um, okay, what do you? I sort of asked this at the beginning in a roundabout way, I think. Um, do you can you see ways in which that something like the idea of a platform, be it like Second Life or Fortnite or any of these other things, if they were open, connecting with the idea of the web thing. There's a lady presenting here tomorrow, Nora Nuke, who, in a very simple way, has actually put virtual worlds that are based on the web, whether they're flip books or actual worlds you walk around in, onto prims in OpenSim. So literally, I can go to a region, I can walk up to this wall, which contains a screen of a virtual world, and I can walk into the wall, and the moment I touch the wall, I'm transported onto that website, which is a virtual world in itself. Now that's a lovely feeling, be able to do that, move from one place to the other, but it is presumably strictly limited. There aren't
Yes.
apart from Second Life, there aren't many places that are like OpenSim. So do you think that these things can come together?
I think we're already starting to see that, but addressability across multiple platforms is a challenge. There's a handful of social and political challenges to interoperability that need to be addressed in terms of cross-platform engagement. Right now, there are platforms like Croquet, for example, that
Yes.
do allow for that. And you can check out Croquet right now. They are open source. You can download their microverse, and they have a second product that just released this week to make your own basically 3D
Yes.
websites easily, where you could do that and then, for example, point people to your open sim worlds. So that would be the first step is something like Croquet. I think we're going to see a lot of similar tooling, whether it's from Hubs and Frame and the sort of early WebXR spaces, but also from some of the existing VR worlds. Obviously, Meta's looking at some of this.
Yeah.
Some of the other sort of well-known VR ecosystems are certainly looking at how people will be able to walk between 3D web spaces, right? Because
Yeah.
WebXR, we've been creating WebXR experiences now for 5+ years.
Yeah.
There hasn't been search, there hasn't been discoverability. So without those two things, we've generally had a mismatch between what is available in the open metaverse and what people actually know about or can get to. And so as we deal with the challenges of addressability, right? How do you find the things? And the Fediverse, right? The community aspect, the how do we refer each other from one place to another? Because much of this is just like in the Second Life days, in the Open Sim early days, it's friends telling friends about where to go and what to do.
Yeah.
And so we haven't figured out how to scale that sort of friends of friends
Well,
communication style yet.
even in places like Second Life, which arguably have scaled to, they're probably their maximum now, but the tribal instinct still remains. As you say, people spread it around friends, come join me and whatever. And actually, what tends to happen is that there'll be whole tribes. I mean, I remember my ex-partner late Martin, used to tell me about Talk City, I think it was, the Apple thing, which she was on. And then whole communities would move from there to like their.com, and then from there to Second Life, and then from there to OpenSim. And it was an extension of that friends thing. You know, the tribe is created, and then the tribe is moving to the most appropriate place. You know, every few years it maybe jumps to a new place that better suits it. Um, on the other hand, I don't know. Wouldn't the word of mouth thing sort of I mean, obviously it's totally invaluable, but wouldn't it kind of maybe, if it was all just down to that, would it inhibit the growth of something, or do you think an inhibited growth is actually a good thing? I.e., if it grows slowly, it's a bit more authentic than if somehow it launches in one foul swoop and everybody wants to be in there.
Um, I'll go ahead and take that one now.
Yeah.
I think I think that's sort of a multi-layered. There's a multi-layered answer there.
Yeah.
I know that, you know, when I met folks, friends, and colleagues in Second Life, we also migrated, you know, simultaneously to Twitter at the same time, and then some folks went to OpenSim, others play, you know. So there's definitely sort of like an early adopter mentality that, you know, that a lot of us sort of are trying out these very emergent platforms, and then once like the sort of like the early curve is there, then we're off and we're interested in the next big thing. What's the next new exciting thing? So I think that you know, these sort of like early adopter tribes, you know, that are often these immersive, you know, we're all in these immersive platforms, that sort of creates this early interest. And then as things grow, sort of like more mainstream consumers get involved in it, and then it starts really scaling out. So I definitely feel like this particular tribe, us, you know,
Yeah.
here at OSCC, we're definitely sort of like on that early curve, you know. We're going to be populating sort of like the next big immersive thing or things. But it's important to have that, and it's important to have like the, you know, mainstream consumers to scale it out and see what actually it becomes, because when a platform is first created, it needs like the folks that use it need to sort of find what it's most optimal for, right? Like, so there's kind of an incubation period that happens with every new technology where it's created, and then like it finds its place because the users use it and sort of find optimal uses for it. So I'm not sure if that actually answers your question.
Well,
That's multi-layered.
we'd be here all day if you tried to answer the whole thing, but it's raising the issues in the back of our mind, should I say. Um, Now, the other thing is, I know in your case, Josephine, you and Joyce at the conference here are parts of the, I've got the standards, what are they called again?
Metaverse Standards Forum,
That's right. Now,
right? Yeah.
I know OMI has made connections there too, but I do know that you and Joyce are part of the subgroup that kind of is very much focused on that. Can you maybe tell us a little about them? As you know, we've talked about OMI. We'll come back to OMI, but maybe just give us a little brief on those.
Yes. Also, I mean, Evo and Kenzo also very much involved with that as well.
Yeah.
And Jesse, who's not here right now. But sure, yeah. So the Metaverse Standards Forum was created after OMI was, but it's more of a formal structure to explore standards and interoperability, making interoperability more formalized. So they're not calling themselves a standards creating organization, but a lot of it is sort of like these working groups that are created towards the exploration of interoperability, making interoperability a priority. What's interesting about it is that the members are mostly companies. Like to join as a member, you have to be affiliated with a company, but you can be sort of a smaller company. There are some very large companies that are part of it too. Kronos has actually helped to get it off the ground and have created the infrastructure for it. So you're seeing a mix of sort of like large tech companies in it, and also smaller independent. And the very crucial role that OMI has played is that a lot of folks in OMI are independent creators and, you know, freelancers, a lot of content creators that have been in immersive development for a very long time, back in the early, days of Second Life, in fact. And we want to make sure that those smaller independent creators have a voice, right? So the idea was that OMI gets involved in the Metaverse Standards Forum by going to meetings, documenting things, passing that information of what's happening in the Metaverse Standards Forum back to OMI members to make sure that those smaller independent creators have a voice and the voices don't get lost in the things that are being created with Metaverse Standards Forum, because in fact, we want to make sure that everything, again, stays open.
Yeah,
Right.
of course, we all want to interconnect. I mean, I think it's safe to say that the Standards Forum, because as you say, it's made up of some pretty big companies. Great to have them involved, but I think that at the end of the day, you can't guarantee everything in there is going to be open source, but maybe the standards will be common. Whereas OMI, I'll let Kenzo answer this. Really has been devoted from the start to the idea of an open metaverse, and I would say open source, really, or the
Correct.
code you've contributed, the audio emitters and things like that. This is all open source contribution, isn't it? Okay, so
Correct. It is extending what has been started as open source in the case of GLTF, or building new open source tooling as well. So there are existing open source standards, for example, with avatars using VRM, where some of our members are extending the ability of a VRM avatar to go across worlds and be rigged properly and do its animations properly, that sort of thing. So there's a wide variety of independent creator research that happens within OMI that isn't really supported elsewhere. And we do this, obviously it's all volunteer, it's open source, we're not funded. We do this because we believe that the space needs to be a level playing field. And places like Metaverse Standards Forum can become very sort of corporate heavy, and I want to encourage all of you to participate, because you do not have to be a part of a corporation. You do have to use an institutional email, but that can be a university, that can be a nonprofit as well. So I joined originally as part of a nonprofit called XR Guild, which I helped found during the pandemic as well. And many of you who are here can participate in groups like Metaverse Standards Forum, if you care about the standardization process and pushing back with companies on those agreements. But we would love to have you at OMI, especially if you're interested in the early stage, the research and development that isn't well funded yet, the kinds of things that happen in hack together sessions when you get avatars walking between worlds. We do more of that sort of edgy and early stage research, and we welcome all of you to come and participate. We're in Discord, but we're also doing demos pretty much everywhere. Our members are active in, I would say, at least 40 different open metaverse platforms of some nature.
I've seen on the weekly Discord meets, for example. I know there's masses of them, but on the general one, I've seen you do members do demos there and things, and of course. In the case of OMI, as opposed to the Standards Authority, that's open to individuals, really. Anybody who supports the idea, isn't it? Well, two things actually. You obviously spread yourselves around everywhere, don't we all, if we can? But I would say the Discord community is the real hub there, and I've become very much an advocate of Discord. In fact, we're recording the audio here on Discord now, in fact, in the sense that although there's a lot of every, subculture in every grid everywhere, a game has got a Discord channel. If you think of, the platform level or sort of things, I've got a Discord channel called Hypergrid Adventurers and Explorers, Creators and Explorers, which is basically anybody who does creativity or likes going on trips can join that server. And then I have sub-channels for individual grids that are on the hypergrid. But over and beyond that, and some other open sim ones, and of course the OMI channels, it seems to me you could almost hold a conference on Discord where, you can have 50 virtual worlds all in a conversation with one representative from each and screen sharing. So you literally you bring one world up to another, and you can already have that communication between worlds because Discord sits really happily in the middle there. It was, after all, designed for gamers, so the parallels are kind of there. Do you think as a movement, it would be possible to, I don't want to say hijack Discord, but to take something that's basic like that and actually evolve it to actually suit our purposes.
Could,
I know,
but
I know
it
obviously,
isn't necessarily the best tool for that. So, for
yeah.
example, early on in the pandemic, I helped produce the IEEE and VR conference, which was managed through Zoom and then multicast through Twitch, and then brought into over 100 hubs rooms. Right. And so if you're thinking about a conference with many different sessions happening concurrently and simultaneously across many virtual worlds platforms,
Mm.
Discord is an okay tool until you go to a country where it's not working.
Ah, yes,
Every tool has a breakdown point, and right now, none of the interoperability tools are bulletproof
yeah.
at
Raises the
all.
question: should a future
Right. So we get to breakdowns that are sometimes political in nature as well, right?
yeah,
So governments that want to control all comms don't necessarily want to allow for tooling that, enables people to talk around the world. So
yeah,
there are political and policy-driven conversations also in play that make those things hard, but the technology exists, right? We could do this, and Meta Traversal was part of that, right? So the Meta
yeah,
Traversal events were really inviting all of the different metaverse platform creators to come to the table, share their interoperability work and agreements and where they were headed, and that really led to a number of deep dive conversations that formed the Metaverse Standards Forum, but also led to some great partnerships. And we're seeing the beginnings of the fruit of that labor now. That's not to say that we have lots of people working toward an open metaverse. Right now, we still have a lot of people working toward their own flavor of a planet of the metaverse, right? They're building their own little worlds instead of thinking about how they all connect together.
okay. I'm going to come to some more basic questions, I think, shortly. But bearing in mind that, I don't know, it's a pity Mr. Metaverse hasn't actually managed to get it yet, because I thought he might actually be the one to sort of address best, like the devs in the room, so to speak. But both of you are familiar with how OpenSim works, and therefore the building with prims and the things you can do. I think you both know that generally. I'm wondering, for people in the audience here now, we want to encourage them, especially the devs and maybe even the creators, to actually take an interest in OMI. There are so many subgroups and work groups in OMI that a designer, a builder, a coder, they can all find their little niche there, if they're interested. And I'm hoping to get them interested, because is there any way between the two of you can sort of give examples or explain the sort of thing that a dev here might be able to contribute in OMI, and then in fact serve both parties? In other words, the work they would do with you might be usable here, or things they do here might be usable there, so to speak. Again, there's a loaded question, really, but your thoughts?
I
Yeah,
can speak towards that, Mal, and I'm sure that Eva will add to it as well.
yeah,
But yeah, for sure. So I also do development as well. I think that for OMI, I'm actually much more concentrated on the sort of MSF delegate policy side. But with the dev background of any kind, I would say that folks are welcome to come in. As Evo mentioned, there are some really fun and productive hacking sessions that are held on, for example, there's the Avatar Interoperability Working Group, and they meet weekly, or I'm not sure exactly what the schedule is, but they are specifically concentrating on making, like, what you had talked about before, about sort of these questions of home, and like what you can bring with yourself, with your avatar. How does your avatar present? And then also identity. Your avatar becomes your identity. How does identity represent in these different platforms? As well as wearables, sort of the interoperability of wearables that you bring with you, and portals. So I feel like there's so much within all of those subtopics
yeah,
that one can get into in some of these hacking sessions. the groups that I've popped into have been, oh, and the more and newer group, Evo can probably speak through that a little bit more, is
Yeah.
UX research
Oh
of
yeah.
sort of immersive, and interoperable experiences. But yeah, I would say that everyone is very welcoming, and don't concern yourself with sort of like the degree of development you have in your background. Just come on in.
Yeah. And it is very easy. Just what to go to a general meeting once a week on Wednesdays
Yep.
on Discord,
Wednesday
and
Yep.
mornings on Discord, right? And
yeah,
um,
yeah,
we've done our best to try and make these things super accessible. OMI has a very active GitHub, so we do a lot of project management, and our different groups are sometimes documenting well on GitHub. So would encourage you, if that's useful to you, if you're in the open source space. And if not, and you're looking to create collaborative materials together, and you want to reach out and say, let's create some research materials, let's create some educational materials, let's create some videos together, let's create some blog posts together. We are a fairly large group of community members who can do that with you. So we have an existing web tool. We're using WordPress. One of our members has built WordPress to work for 3D and to work for WebXR, to be able to begin to use that for portaling as well. So we're eager to extend and expand how we are doing this research with others. And then we have a UX research group that's just formed recently. We're going to have a study going out in a few weeks, and we'd love for your participation in that. But part of that is to help understand what are the UX topics specifically in this space that are not well covered. What are the places where we can do the best work together in terms of not just how do we connect our experiences in terms of our own personal grids, and how do we walk between these worlds, but also the more common questions that aren't asked. So I think there's a lot of room for potential collaboration with many of you here, and I hope that you'll reach out. MSF is the Metaverse Standards Forum. So Metaverse Standards Forum formed in the last 9 months. Neil Trivet, and who is at Kronos and NVIDIA, leads that. And so it is a separate organization. It is being formed as a completely separate organization from Kronos and these other initiatives. And honestly, that is where most of the corporate engagement is happening. So if you're interested in participating with companies on forming safety standards or consent and data standards, research standards, all of that, please, we invite you to participate at MSF, and we all do
yeah.
as well.
Neil Trevor himself has been appeared on video on the weekly things, at OMI, so, keen to be as close as possible. I'd also mention that in February, there's a kind of what they call an Open Metaverse conference coming up, which is, it's organized by Lamina, who are saying it's not a promotion for them. And OMI was invited to be a partner, but I think we're now just being a sort of a casual collaborator. You've got Neil Stevenson there. We've got Tony Philip Linden is going to be there. What we didn't mention, of course, when we were resuming the early days was the VRML, but is a fund. Oh, right, never mind. Okay, I'm told we're down to our last 5-10 minutes or so. So I'm going to ask Leah in a minute if she's noticed any particular questions we should answer. But I will actually, I'll take the opportunity to use somebody else's question. It's a chap in the audience called Ran Hendricks. Welcome, Ran. He was in our YouTube channel earlier talking, he said, in everyone's opinion, what are the highlights and advances in virtual worlds in the year 2022? And what do you see are the key directions for the year 2023? And I thought, well, yeah, that's a great question. I can relay that question to some of my guests. So I'm going to relay that question to both of you. Outside OMI and over and beyond things, what have been the advances this year, and what do you think might be coming up? Silence.
I didn't know, Eva, if you wanted to take that first. I can pop in. As far as advances go, I think sort of the connection from physical to digital and back I'm seeing a lot of really incredible advances. I'm working with a company right now that has digital twins that are connected to actual physical machines. So it's like sort of a real-time data exchange, and I think that is really, really exciting and has some pretty cool implications across the okay, I have to say also, even though I know there's been a lot of like AI hate, like all the advances with AI and ChatGPT with images, but with virtual worlds and like what's going on with stable diffusion and 3D. So, you know, the ability, for example, to take a couple of like 2D photos and extrapolate a 3D space from it in a matter of minutes. And then, of course, tweaking it so that the developers now may become more architects of
And,
things.
uh,
You
and
know,
Right.
yeah,
And those are all
they've got an
tools.
AI that actually writes stuff now as well. So it's
right,
interesting.
Correct.
yeah.
Chat GPT and GPT-3 and coming GPT-4. So there is certainly generative tooling that is already being used in some of these WebXR spaces. For example, I saw a demo in Hubs. There's a couple of the sort of integrations between the generative and the virtual worlds experience that are coming. So that's exciting. But also the more agreement-based stuff. For example, just getting portals working between platforms. That's a huge initiative, and we've seen many groups embracing different versions of that, both for events and for connecting spaces into something that feels more like a community or a neighborhood. So I'm excited for that, you know, being able to walk between our platforms and worlds and really, you know, go on field trips together across the open metaverse. Those things were hard to do a couple of years ago, and it's becoming a lot easier to do, not just here in the hypergrid, but
Yeah.
across all of the vast spaces of the open web.
I'll just plug something and that, well, it's actually here tomorrow too, but you know, even here, 2 hours after the OMI meeting every Wednesday, I'm back in here for what we call the Hypergrid Safari, where we spend 2 hours every week just jumping from, you know, between 2 or 3 different grids. There's a meet at the clubhouse and we all go on safari together. Yeah, I gather in the back channel that Mr. Metaverse has actually apologized. He's with family and couldn't make it here, even though he's probably back from his run. So that's a shame. But anyway, we're probably down to about 3 minutes now, actually.
Yeah, and the
Oh,
questions
and
are
that
great here.
good timing. I'm just going to go to Leah. I think she's got got a couple of questions, and I did notice that. Well, I'll go to Leah first. There was somebody in the audience who did a good one, and I can't find it.
There's fantastic orgs for digital twins out there that we do work with. I am not working with the NAMData network that you mentioned there, replacing TCP/IP, but there are initiatives to replace how addresses are handled across the open web, and figuring out what that looks like to move to a 3D web address, so that addressability happens in 3D space instead of in 2D space is one of those initiatives. But there
Okay.
are many different versions of that.
And
Okay.
thank you. That was an answer to the question by Tree Kyomun, who was asking about name data, network folks, and TCP/IP.
That's the one I was looking for. We found
Yes, we had another comment related to that, and perhaps you've already answered it. He also asks, we need that personal grid concept to really have patient data in the healthcare model if it's going to work in here. And then there's another question by Lisa Laxton. I'll go ahead and give that to you, and then you can chat about it. The question is, are you aware of the Web3D HNM standard for and I'll put that in the chat too, in case that was not clear. There you go.
right. Well, we have not very much time. I guess. Do either of you know this? I must say, I'm drawing a blank on name data network, but
I mean, I was aware of it like early on. I know it's sort of like an earlier standard, but I haven't seen anything like any sort of like more recent developments. Although I think sort of the implications for like movement is interesting. Although what's happening now with the ability to kind of like extrapolate on smaller movements without having to use hand controllers and things like that is, I think, also like potentially really, really interesting.
yeah. Okay, well, I'm really going to have to wrap it. You know, I really want to have 2 or 3 hour sessions here. You know, so I have to take the whole afternoon, but it's not possible. But despite the fact Mr. First did not make it, we've it feels to me like we've barely touched the surface. But you've been wonderful guests. Covered so much. So I'd like to thank Josephine Funksu. Thank you,
Thank you.
and Inkenzo. Because I still call it.
Thank you for having us, Mal. This has been
Ego.
fantastic. And I hope all of you will join us for whether it's at Open Metaverse Interoperability or at the Metaverse Standards Forum or just here on Discord. We look forward to hearing what you're up to and where we can work together. Thanks for having us.
Sure. And we'll make sure that yeah, all the details are posted in wherever we post this stuff, so you can follow them up if you haven't picked them up in chats already. Okay, well that's it, folks. I'm actually back tomorrow with the return of the viewer panel, whatever that means.
Thank you, Mel. And thank you, panelists, for an informative and interesting presentation. As a reminder to our audience, you will want to check out the conference.opensimulator.org to see what is coming up on the conference schedule. You won't want to miss our next session, which will begin at 1:30 in this keynote region, and it's entitled The Basel Viewer Experiment. Also, we encourage you to visit the OSCC22 Poster Expo region in the OSCC Expo 3 region to find accompanying information on presentations and to explore the hypergrid resources in OSCC Expo 2 region, along with our sponsor and crowdfunder booths located throughout all of the OSCC Expo regions. Thank you again to our panel and to you, the audience.